A blade gleams, a secret bleeds. Welcome to Fog Casebook. I am your host, Vela. Tell me where you're listening from below. Your presence makes this story richer. Let's dive in. In setting down the particulars of the singular affair which my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes was pleased, at a later stage, to describe as a trifle over-ornamented, Watson, but by no means over-simple, I am compelled at the outset to confess a personal reluctance. Not that I am mindful of any danger to myself, for my share in the business was chiefly that of observer and recorder, nor because the names concerned are of such consequence that the mere mention of them would set society wagging its tongue, for indeed it did so wag and loudly, but because the case, even now, retains something of that peculiar chill which clings to certain memories as the fog clings to the Thames. There are crimes, it seems, which are committed in hot blood, ugly, direct, and understandable in their brutality, and there are others, devised in cold rooms by cooler minds, which leave behind them not only a corpse or a theft, but a question. The latter are the more disquieting. One cannot lay them to rest with the laying out of the dead. It was in the early autumn of '89, if my memory serves, a week of damp mornings and premature twilight, when the affair first entered our quiet rooms in Baker Street. Holmes had risen late, as he commonly did when unoccupied by a problem, and was now stretched full length upon the sofa in his dressing gown, a thin column of grey tobacco smoke rising like a spectral wick above his pipe. His eyes were half closed, but I had long since learned that this posture signified not indolence, but that tense inward concentration which could, at a moment's notice, flash into action. I sat near the window with a day's paper, endeavouring to lose myself in the doings of Parliament and the minor scandals of the clubs, yet finding my attention wander again and again to Holmes. There was in him, even at rest, that air of contained energy which makes a man's stillness more noticeable than another's movement. "You are not reading, Watson," he observed suddenly without opening his eyes. "I beg your pardon," said I, lowering the Times. "I was, at least I meant to." "You were watching the reflection in the window pane. It is a habit with you when you are uneasy." I laughed. "Uneasy? I assure you, Holmes, I am entirely at my ease." "Then you have changed your manner of holding the paper in the last 3 minutes for the entertainment of the street. You are grasping it too tightly. Your knuckles whiten. Your left hand is raised as though you expect interruption. My dear fellow, you are insufferable. On the contrary, I am accurate." He opened his eyes and regarded me with that whimsical gravity which made his mockery less of a sting. "We shall be interrupted. The question is by whom and why. You have been uneasy since breakfast because you heard the milkman's cart halt twice in the same place. That means a cab behind it. A cab in Baker Street at this hour means either a client or Lestrade. The cab halted once more half a minute ago. You could not possibly have heard that." "I did not. I smelt it." "Smelt it?" "The faintest trace of damp horsehair and cheap cigar. Lestrade's cabman chews Cavendish. Our clients smoke anything they can afford to throw away." He took his pipe from his lips and smiled. "Listen." Even as he spoke, there came the familiar brisk step upon the stair and the sharp rap at our door. "Come in," cried Holmes. Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard entered with an air of suppressed importance. He was a small man, quick and wiry, with a face that could look either keen or foolish according to the light in which one viewed it. That morning it wore the expression of a man who had slept little and been offended often. "Morning, Mr. Holmes." "Doctor." His eyes flickered over us with the impatience of one who believes himself in advance of his company. "I've come because, well, there's a case. A queer one. Queer enough that I thought of you before I'd got my boots properly on." Holmes's languor fell from him like a cloak. In an instant, he was sitting upright, his long, nervous hands clasped, his gaze fixed, bright and attentive. "Pray proceed." "It's at Lord Ashdown's house. said Lestrade. "The one in Bloomsbury, Ashdown House. You'll have heard the name." "I've heard many names," Holmes replied dryly. "I have not always found them attached to brains. Lord Ashdown, Baron of something, patron of something, and owner of a great many things he did not earn. Is he dead, Lestrade?" "No. Worse, in a way." Lestrade hesitated, as if reluctant to surrender so choice a morsel. "His secretary is dead. Mr. Lionel Collingwood, found in the library this morning, just before 7. Stabbed." "Stabbed," Holmes repeated, and I confess the word sent a small shiver through me, for there are certain methods of death which seem more intimate than others, and therefore more dreadful. Lestrade nodded. "With a dagger. But here's the odd part. It's not any dagger. Well, I'm told it's a curiosity. Gilded, they say. Fancy handle. Antique piece. And the thing's been left in him, upright as a post." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A theatrical mind," said he. "That's what I said," returned Lestrade, gratified. "A fellow who wanted it to be seen and to make a stir. There's more. The dagger belongs to Lord Ashdown, kept in a case in the same library, one of those glass-fronted cabinet things. And the cabinet is now locked," said Lestrade. "Locked and unbroken, and the key on Lord Ashdown's own ring." Holmes leaned back a fraction, his expression sharpening as one sees the edges of a knife sharpen when the light catches it. "A locked cabinet which has yielded its dagger," he murmured. "A corpse which has received it. A key which has not left the owner's possession. Very neat, Lestrade. Almost too neat." "That's what bothers me," said Lestrade frankly. "It points at his lordship, you see. But I can't quite swallow it. A peer of the realm sticking his own secretary in his own library with his own antique dagger and then sitting down to breakfast. It's too dashed clumsy. And yet the facts are whatever we can verify," said Holmes. "The rest is interpretation." Lestrade's eyes narrowed slightly, for he disliked being reminded of method. Still, he pressed on. "There were only 3 people in the house last night besides the servants. Lord Ashdown himself, his niece, Miss Imogen Ashdown. She's staying with him, and Mr. Percival Vane, his lordship's, his friend, a gentleman of leisure. There's also the butler, of course, and a footman and 2 maids, and a cook, but the servants swear they were in bed at 11. The library was locked at midnight. Lord Ashdown says so." "The library itself was locked?" I asked. "Yes. That's another queer part. The door to the library has a key, and Lord Ashdown says he locked it himself at midnight when he went to bed. This morning the door was still locked. It had to be opened from the outside with his key." "And yet a man lies dead within," I said, astonished. Lestrade spread his hands. "There you have it, Doctor." Holmes rose, and I could see the case had caught him. It is a mistake to imagine Holmes as a man who delighted in crime for its own sake. What excited him, what invigorated him as wine invigorates some men, was the presence of a problem which demanded all the faculties of his extraordinary mind. He turned now to the small table where his instruments lay, selecting a lens and slipping it into his pocket with the familiarity of long habit. "Is there any sign of entry?" he asked. "None," said Lestrade. "No broken windows, no forced locks. The servants' staircase is watched. The front door was chained. The garden doors were barred. If a man went in, he didn't go out again." "Unless he never went in," said Holmes. Lestrade frowned. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean," said Holmes, fastening his coat, "that it is unwise to assume a set of movements because they are convenient to the imagination. One must allow the facts to arrange themselves. When we arrive, we will look at your locked room and your gilded dagger. We will listen to Lord Ashdown. We will hear what his niece does not say. We will notice what Mr. Percival Vane finds amusing. And then, perhaps, we shall begin." Lestrade gave a short laugh. "You always talk like that, Mr. Holmes. Like it's a play." "It is a play," said Holmes, taking his hat from the peg. "But it is a play in which the audience may die. Come, Watson." Within a quarter of an hour, we were jolting through the streets in a hansom. The day was one of those London days when the air seems to have been dampened and then forgotten. Grey, heavy, and muffled. The stones shone with last night's rain. The gas lamps still burned in certain courts like pale eyes. A thin fog drifted low, turning the figures of passers-by into shadowed shapes which appeared and vanished without sound. Lestrade, seated opposite, filled us in as far as he was able, though it was plain he withheld certain details, either from professional caution or from the natural human desire to be the bearer of news. "Collingwood was found by the housemaid," he said. "She'd gone to lay the fire as usual and, well, she ran screaming through the corridor. Near gave the cook apoplexy. Lord Ashdown came down in his dressing gown. Miss Ashdown fainted. Mr. Vane poured brandy all round and made jokes till I wanted to knock him down. Then we arrived. A man who jokes at death is either very brave or very guilty," observed Holmes. "Or very stupid," said Lestrade. "Stupidity, too, can be criminal," Holmes returned. Ashdown House stood in Bloomsbury, a large old-fashioned residence whose very brickwork seemed to carry the weight of inherited privilege. It was one of those town houses which have seen fashions pass like weather. Georgian restraint, Regency elegance, Victorian clutter, each leaving its mark in moulding and ironwork and window panels. We were admitted at once, for Lestrade's presence had evidently been anticipated. A pale butler with iron-grey whiskers ushered us through a wide hall where portraits glowered down from dark frames. Everywhere there was a hush, an oppressive, listening stillness, as though the house itself held its breath. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson." Lestrade nodded to the butler. "This is Mr. Bickford, butler here 20 years. Bickford inclined his head with a dignity which might have belonged to a duke. "His lordship awaits you in the morning room, sir, if you will be pleased to follow me." We were led past a staircase that rose like a frozen wave, and along a corridor whose carpet deadened our footsteps. The morning room door stood ajar. Lord Ashdown was a tall man of perhaps 55, with a handsome, worn face and a manner that suggested long practice in being obeyed. His eyes were red-rimmed and his collar imperfectly fastened, as though he had dressed in haste. Yet even in distress there was in him that air of ownership which peers of the realm cultivate as carefully as their gardens. He rose when we entered. "Mr. Holmes," said he with stiff courtesy, "Inspector Lestrade, Dr. Watson." Holmes bowed slightly. "My lord, I am sorry to intrude at such an hour, but Inspector Lestrade has informed me of a most distressing occurrence." "A devilish occurrence," Ashdown snapped, his composure cracking for a moment to show anger beneath. "A scandal, a catastrophe. The man was in my employ, in my house, and—" He stopped, his throat working. "And that wretched thing of mine, my dagger, stuck in him like a butcher's spit." "May I ask," said Holmes quietly, "what you were doing at midnight?" Ashdown stiffened at once. "Midnight? I retired at 11:30. He glanced aside, and for the first time I saw the woman standing near the window. Miss Imogen Ashdown was perhaps 25, slender, with dark hair arranged with a care that could not quite conceal the disarray of the morning. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady and very clear. She held her hands clasped before her, and the tightness of her fingers suggested she was holding herself together by force of will. "I was with my uncle until 11:45, she said in a low voice. "We spoke of family matters." Holmes regarded her, not rudely, but with that unwavering attention which made some women flush and some men bristle. "And after that?" "I went to my room." "And you, my lord?" Ashdown drew a breath as a man draws before plunging into cold water. "I went to my room also," said he. "I locked the library door as I went up. I always do. There are valuables there, and—" He hesitated, as if resenting the need to justify himself. "And I carry the key. It has not left my person." Holmes nodded, his face expressionless. "Your secretary, Mr. Collingwood? What were his habits? Did he remain late?" Collingwood was a... Ashdown's lip curled slightly. "A conscientious fellow. He worked too much, I dare say. He would often stay in the library until I bade him good night." "And did you bid him good night?" "Yes, at 11:30. Holmes's eyes flicked, quick as a bird's, to the butler. "Mr. Bickford, did you see Mr. Collingwood after 11:30? Bickford's face did not alter, but I noticed the smallest tightening at the corners of his mouth. "No, sir," he said. "Mr. Collingwood was in the library. His lordship left the house's business concluded for the evening. The servants retired." "And Mr. Percival Vane?" asked Holmes. At the mention of that name, Lord Ashdown's expression turned momentarily awkward. "Vane, he remained in the drawing-room," said he. He was my guest." "He is not now?" Holmes asked. Ashdown's glance went again to the door, as if expecting the man in question to saunter in at any moment. "He is in the smoking room," said Ashdown curtly. "He has been overfamiliar. I shall perhaps speak with him presently." Holmes paused. "My lord, I should like to see the library at once." Ashdown's hand went to his key-ring. "Of course," he said, "if it will clear this up." "If it will," said Holmes softly. We followed Lord Ashdown along the corridor to the library door. It was a heavy oak door with a brass plate and an old-fashioned keyhole. Ashdown inserted the key with a tremor of impatience and turned it. The lock clicked. He pushed the door open. A cool, bookish air met us. Dust, leather bindings, and the faintest lingering trace of extinguished fire. The room was large, lined with shelves and furnished with deep chairs. A glass-fronted cabinet stood against the far wall, its contents dimly visible. Curiosities, small sculptures, some pieces of armament. The curtains were half-drawn, and the grey light of morning lay across the carpet like a stain. In the centre of the room, sprawled upon his back, lay Lionel Collingwood. He was a man in his 30s, spare and neat even in death. His hair was fair, his features fine and academic. His eyes stared upward, unseeing. From his chest rose the hilt of the dagger, richly gilded, set with what looked like dull red stones. It stood upright, precisely so, like a grotesque ornament. I have seen death in many forms upon the field and in the hospital ward, but there is something peculiarly shocking in a private murder, something that seems to violate the sanctity of domestic life. Miss Ashdown, who had followed us at a little distance, gave a sound half between a gasp and a sob, and turned her head away. Lestrade stepped forward, businesslike, already in his element. "We haven't touched him," he said. "Not a thing. Thought you'd want to see it as it lies." Holmes did not answer. He had gone to his knees beside the corpse, his lens in his hand. He hovered like a hawk, yet with a delicacy that seemed almost reverent. His eyes moved from the dagger hilt to the man's fingers, to the collar, to the floor around him. For a long moment there was silence save for the distant ticking of a clock and the soft rustle as Holmes shifted his weight. At last he spoke, not to any of us in particular, but as if thinking aloud. "Placed, not struck," said he. "A thrust delivered with care. No spatter upon the cuff. The left hand, yes. The right hand, interesting. A faint smear upon the thumb. Not blood. Wax." "Wax," I repeated. Holmes glanced up at me, and for an instant there was that glint of amusement. "My dear Watson," said he, "do try to remember that the world is full of substances which are not blood." He rose, moving now to the cabinet. He examined the lock, the hinges, the glass. He placed his fingers lightly against the frame and then, to my surprise, drew a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the lower edge of the cabinet's door with it. He held the handkerchief up. In the grey light it showed a faint, almost invisible glitter. "Gilt dust," he murmured. Lestrade stepped nearer, craning his neck. "What's that mean?" "It means," said Holmes very quietly, "that someone has been handling a gilded object with more haste than care." He went then to the fireplace. The grate held a heap of grey ash and the blackened remains of paper. "Ah," said he. "What is it?" I asked. Holmes poked gently among the ash with his penknife. He drew out, with the tip of the blade, a fragment of paper no larger than my thumbnail. Upon it I could make out the edge of handwriting, 2 or 3 letters, brown with heat. Holmes's eyes softened with satisfaction. "A message," he said. "Or the end of one." Lestrade snorted. "Everybody burns letters, Mr. Holmes, especially in houses like this. Half the scandal sheets in London would go broke if they didn't." Holmes did not answer him. His attention had shifted to the floor near the corpse. There, close to the dead man's left hand, lay something that at first I took for a scrap of ribbon. Holmes bent, and with a pair of forceps, produced as if by magic from his coat, lifted it. It was a short thread of green silk, no longer than an inch. He held it between finger and thumb, and his nostrils flared slightly, as though he scented not cloth, but meaning. "Green," he said thoughtfully. Miss Ashdown, who had been standing rigidly near the door, spoke at last. "Mr. Holmes," she said, and her voice was steadier than I should have expected, "do you truly believe this is to be solved? They keep saying, Inspector Lestrade keeps saying, it is impossible, that no one could have entered, that no one could have left, and yet—" She gestured faintly toward the corpse, unable to look at it. Holmes's gaze went to her, and something in his expression gentled, only slightly, for gentleness was not natural to him, but enough that I saw the change. "Miss Ashdown," said he, "the word impossible is a convenient refuge for those who do not wish to think. A locked door is a fact, a dead man is a fact. The manner in which those facts are connected is not a fact until it is demonstrated." Lestrade cleared his throat. "Well, demonstrated or not, Mr. Holmes, I've got to act, and I've got to act quick. The press will be on this like flies. Lord Ashdown's got enemies. Collingwood had, well, he had his share of disputes. I've already got a suspect, if you want the truth." Holmes turned his head slowly. "Indeed." "A footman," said Lestrade. "Young fellow, name of Harker. He's got a temper. Collingwood had him threatened with dismissal. Harker was seen hanging about the corridor after 11, and there's a spot of blood on his sleeve." Lord Ashdown's face hardened. "Harker?" he repeated. "Nonsense. The boy's a fool, but not a murderer." "Fools murder often enough," Lestrade returned sharply, "and more clumsily than clever men. The case looks clumsy to you, perhaps, because you're looking at the gilt in the cabinet. I'm looking at the blood. There's blood on the footman. There's a dead man in the library, and there's no way out. I'll take my fool." Holmes's eyes narrowed, and I knew that Lestrade's certainty had touched his pride. "You may take whom you please," said Holmes. "Only be so good as not to hang your fool before I have finished with the cabinet." Lestrade flushed. "Hang? We don't hang men on suspicion. We hang them on conclusions," said Holmes, "which are often no better." Lestrade muttered something under his breath and turned away, summoning a constable who stood by the door. The butler was dispatched to fetch the footman. Holmes, meanwhile, returned to the body. He crouched once more, and with a swift, delicate movement he lifted the dead man's right hand. The fingers were slightly curled, as though they had gripped something in the last moment. Holmes examined the nails, the palm, the faint line of the wrist. Then, very gently, he let the hand fall. His face remained composed, but I saw in his eyes that quiet inner spark, the sign that a thread had been found and that he meant to follow it wherever it led. "Watson," he said softly, "do you see this?" I bent. Near the cuff of Collingwood's shirt, on the inside, there was a faint stain. no more than a shadow. "It is hardly visible," said I. "A bruise?" Holmes shook his head. "Not a bruise, a pressure mark. Something was wound around the wrist. Something narrow." His gaze flicked to the green silk thread in his forceps. "Like that? You mean he was bound?" "Or he bound himself," said Holmes. "Or he wore something which served as a bond." Before I could respond, footsteps sounded in the corridor. A young man was brought in by the constable, his face white with fear and anger. His sleeve was indeed stained, dark, crusted, unmistakable. "That's him," said Lestrade. "Harker. Now then, my lad, where were you between 11 and 7? The footman's eyes darted about the room, landing at last upon the dead man. He swallowed hard. "I was in my bed," he said hoarsely, "like the rest." "Liar," said Lestrade. Harker's hands clenched. "I'm not lying," he burst out. God help me, I went to the pantry, that's all. I couldn't sleep. I went down for a bit of bread, and when I came back up, I saw Mr. Collingwood's door open." "Which door?" asked Holmes suddenly. Harker looked at him as though startled to find another voice besides the inspector's. "Mr. Collingwood's room," he said. "The door was open a crack. I saw light. I thought he'd catch me about. So I went quick." "Did you see him?" Holmes asked. "No, sir. Just light. And a shadow, maybe. Someone moving." Lestrade seized upon it. "A shadow. Someone in his room. Who was it? Answer." "I don't know," cried Harker, his voice rising. "I didn't look. I was afraid." "And the blood?" Harker's eyes filled with something like helpless rage. "It's not his," he said. "It's mine. I cut myself this morning on a broken plate in the scullery. Ask cook. She can tell you. I didn't kill him. I swear on my mother I didn't." Lestrade looked unconvinced. Lord Ashdown made a sound of disgust, as though the entire matter of servants and their protestations offended his sense of order. Holmes, however, watched Harker with that same steady attention he had given the cabinet and the corpse. When the footman spoke of the open door and the light within, I saw Holmes's eyelids lower slightly, as they did when he absorbed some detail which he deemed of importance. "And you say," Holmes asked, "that you saw light in Mr. Collingwood's room after 11? "Yes, sir," Harker whispered. Holmes nodded once as if to himself. "Very good. That will do for the moment." Lestrade stared. "That will do? Are you letting him go?" "For the moment," said Holmes. "Inspector, you may arrest him if it pleases you. But if you do, kindly arrest the scullery maid also, and perhaps the cat, for they might have produced shadows and spilt blood in kitchens." Lestrade's face darkened. Yet to my surprise, he did not press the point. Perhaps the presence of Lord Ashdown restrained him, or perhaps Holmes's calm contempt unsettled him. Holmes turned to Lord Ashdown. "My lord," he said, "I should like to see the cabinet key." Ashdown drew his key ring from his pocket and held it out with a gesture of irritation. Holmes took it, examined the bit, the wear upon it, the scratches along the shank. He held it up near his eye, then replaced it in Ashdown's palm. "This key has been used frequently," he remarked. "But not last night." Ashdown's eyes widened. "That is absurd," he said sharply. "I told you I locked the library." Holmes's face remained polite. "You may have done so," said he, "but the key you used was not that one." A silence fell upon the room, as palpable as the fog outside. Miss Ashdown's lips parted, but she said nothing. Lestrade's head jerked up. Lord Ashdown's face, for one instant, looked as though he had been struck. "That is," he began, and stopped. Holmes glanced toward the cabinet again, and then toward the dead man, and then, so quickly I almost missed it, toward the half-burnt papers in the grate. "Watson," said he, his voice very low, "we are dealing with a deception that has been arranged in layers, like paint upon old wood. Scratch the surface, and one finds what was there before." "And what was there before?" I asked. Holmes's eyes, for the briefest instant, met mine, and in them I saw not the cold pleasure of a puzzle, but something harder. "Fear," said he. Lestrade gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Fear? Whose fear?" Holmes did not answer him. He turned instead to Bickford the butler. "Mr. Bickford," said he, "when you bring a tray to the library, how do you set it down?" Bickford blinked, thrown by the oddity of the question. "Upon the table by the eastern chair, sir," he replied automatically. Holmes moved like a shadow to that table. He knelt and peered beneath it. When he rose, he held between his fingers a tiny crescent of something dark. "A chip of sealing wax," said he. I stared. "Then there was a letter," I whispered. "There was a letter," Holmes agreed. "And it was sealed," I added, finding my own mind at last catching the rhythm of his. Holmes's expression flickered with satisfaction. "And if it was sealed," said he, "it was meant to be opened or meant to be seen unopened?" He slipped the chip into an envelope in his pocket. "My lord," said he to Ashdown, "we shall speak again. Inspector, you will do well to hold your arrest lightly. Watson, you will accompany me upstairs." "Upstairs?" said Lestrade sharply. "What for? The body's here." "The body," said Holmes, "is where the murderer wished you to look." He inclined his head once more to Miss Ashdown. "Miss Ashdown, I shall require a word with you presently. Alone, if you please." Her eyes met his, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or a warning. "As you wish," she said softly. Holmes turned on his heel. "Come, Watson," he repeated. And as I followed him from that dreadful room, the image of the gilded dagger, bright even in the dim light, absurdly splendid and horribly intimate, remained with me like the after-image of a lantern seen too long in the fog. Holmes led the way upstairs with long, silent strides, taking the steps two at a time as though the answers themselves lay somewhere above us. I followed closely, my mind still occupied with the image of the locked library and the implication, quietly dropped yet profoundly unsettling, that Lord Ashdown's own account could not be taken at face value. We reached the first-floor landing, where a long corridor ran the length of the house, lit by tall windows now dulled by the fog outside. Doors opened off it at regular intervals, each marked by the faint individuality of its occupant. A vase here, a footstool there, the ghost of perfume lingering in the air. "Mr. Collingwood's room," Holmes murmured, pausing before a plain walnut door. He did not knock. Instead, he bent at once, examining the threshold with the same intense concentration he had shown in the library. I watched as he traced the line where carpet met wood, then straightened abruptly. "Just as I thought," he said. "Observe, Watson." I knelt beside him. There were faint marks upon the carpet, slight indentations, almost imperceptible unless one knew to look for them. "Boot heels," I said uncertainly. "But surely—" "Not Mr. Collingwood's," Holmes cut in. "He wore slippers indoors, as any man with gouty inclinations would. These marks were made by outdoor shoes, narrow-heeled, light tread." "A woman's," I ventured. Holmes did not answer directly. He turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was neat to the point of austerity. A narrow bed stood against the wall, its coverlet turned down but unslept in. A writing desk occupied the far corner, papers arranged in tidy stacks, a pen laid precisely across an inkwell. The fire had burned low, leaving only embers. Holmes went straight to the desk. "Notice anything?" he asked. I scanned it carefully. "The papers seem undisturbed," I said. "No sign of a struggle, no drawers forced." "Exactly," said Holmes. "Which tells us that whatever occurred here was not violent. Now look at the chair." The chair was slightly askew, its back not quite aligned with the desk. "He rose in a hurry," Holmes continued. "Not alarmed, otherwise he would have upset the chair, but compelled. Someone he expected, or someone he feared disappointing. He reached out and touched the edge of the desk. His fingers came away faintly sticky. "Wax again?" he said softly. "You mean the letter was here?" I asked. "Yes," and opened. He glanced toward the fireplace, which explains the fragment below, but note this. He pulled open the desk drawer and produced a small ivory paper knife. No seal cutter. He opened it hastily with what lay to hand. I felt a tightening in my chest. "And then?" "Then," said Holmes, "he went downstairs. Willingly." "To his death?" Holmes's expression grew grave. Perhaps not knowingly. There came a sudden sound from the corridor, a light footstep, hesitant, then retreating. Holmes's head snapped up. "Someone has been listening," he said. He crossed the room in 2 strides and opened the door sharply. Miss Ashdown stood a few paces away, her hand half raised as though caught between flight and explanation. "I beg your pardon," she said quickly. "I did not mean to intrude. I thought you might require." Holmes regarded her intently. "Miss Ashdown," he said, "may I ask you a question which I beg you to answer with absolute candor?" She nodded, though her face had paled. "Did you write a letter to Mr. Collingwood last night?" Her eyes flickered, only for an instant, but it was enough. "No," she said. "I did not." Holmes inclined his head, as though acknowledging not the answer, but the effort it cost her. "Very well," he said. "Then perhaps you received one." She drew a breath. "Yes," she said. "I did." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And was it sealed with green wax?" Her composure faltered. She looked away. "Yes." "From whom?" She hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "From Mr. Collingwood." Holmes was silent for a long moment. Then he stepped aside, allowing her to pass. "Thank you," he said. "That will be all. For now." She moved away down the corridor, her steps unsteady. I turned to Holmes, my thoughts racing. "She lied at first," I said. "Yes." "And Collingwood wrote to her, then went to the library, then was killed with a dagger that left wax and gilt dust behind. And which was placed, not struck," Holmes added. "Yes, Watson. We are beginning to see the outline." He glanced once more around the room, then closed the door gently behind us. "The footman saw light here," he said as we descended the stairs. "Which means Collingwood was alive after 11. Lord Ashdown says otherwise. Miss Ashdown admits truths, and someone, man or woman, wore outdoor shoes in this corridor after midnight." "And Mr. Percival Vane?" I asked. Holmes's lips curved into a thin, thoughtful smile. "Ah," said he, "now there is a man who jokes at death. Let us see what he finds amusing." As we reached the ground floor, the murmur of voices drifted from the smoking room, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of laughter, light, careless, and profoundly out of place in a house that still held a corpse. Holmes paused, his hand upon the door. "Remember this, Watson," he said quietly. "When a crime is adorned, it is rarely for beauty. It is for distraction." He opened the door and we stepped inside. The smoking room was warm and thick with the scent of tobacco, a stark contrast to the chill that seemed to cling to the rest of the house. A fire burned brightly in the grate, and beside it, lounging with an ease that bordered on insolence, sat Mr. Percival Vane. He rose at once when we entered, a tall man with an easy smile, fashionably dressed even at such an hour, his dark hair immaculate. "Holmes, isn't it?" he said lightly. "I've heard of you. Extraordinary business, this. Beastly shock for poor Ashdown. Won't do his digestion any good." Holmes regarded him without expression. "Mr. Vane," he said, "you appear remarkably untroubled by the presence of a dead man in the next room." Vane shrugged. "What's the alternative? Hand-wringing? I leave that to the professionals." His eyes flicked toward me. "Doctor." "Your humor," Holmes observed, "is either a defense or a confession." Vane laughed outright. "Dear me. Straight to the gallows, are we? I assure you, Mr. Holmes, I didn't stick the fellow. I scarcely knew him. Yet you were his host's guest, Holmes replied, and you remained downstairs while the rest of the house retired. True enough, I don't sleep early. Ashdown knows that. He gestured toward a decanter. Brandy? Holmes ignored the offer. Where were you between 11 and midnight? Here, in this very chair. Reading. Dozing, perhaps. The butler came in at 11:30 to stoke the fire. Holmes's eyes moved briefly to the hearth. Nothing else? Well, Vane said, considering. I did step into the corridor for a moment. Thought I heard a door, but old houses are full of noises, aren't they? Which corridor? Holmes asked quickly. The one upstairs, Vane replied, near Miss Ashdown's room. I felt Holmes's attention sharpen, though his tone remained mild. And did you see Miss Ashdown? No, said Vane, but I saw her door open earlier in the evening. She was writing letters. Holmes nodded slowly, filing the remark away. Thank you, Mr. Vane. That will be all, for now. Vane raised an eyebrow. That's it? No handcuffs? Not at present, Holmes said. As we left the room, Holmes spoke in a low voice. He is careless, he said. Carelessness often masquerades as innocence. We returned to the hall where Lestrade was issuing brisk instructions to a constable. He turned at our approach. I've sent for a magistrate, he said, and the footman's being held. I won't have this dragging on. Holmes met his gaze coolly. Inspector, you will find that this case has no respect for your timetable. Lestrade bristled. You've got theories, he snapped. I've got evidence. You have a man with blood on his sleeve, Holmes replied. I have a sealed letter, green wax, a locked cabinet that was not locked with its own key, and a dagger chosen for display rather than efficiency. Lestrade hesitated, unwillingly intrigued. And what does that give you? A motive that has not yet shown its face, Holmes said, and a victim who walked to his death believing he still had a choice. At that moment, a sharp cry rang out from above, high, sudden, unmistakably female. Miss Ashdown. Holmes was moving before the echo faded. We took the stairs two at a time, Lestrade close behind. The cry had come from the far end of the upper corridor. A door stood open. Miss Ashdown was inside her room, pressed back against the dressing table, staring at the floor. There, she whispered. That wasn't there before. Holmes followed her gaze. Upon the carpet lay a thin coil of green silk cord, neatly looped, as though placed deliberately to be found. Holmes knelt, examining it closely. Identical to the thread in the library, he murmured. Lestrade swore under his breath. So the murderer's still in the house? Or wishes you to believe so, Holmes replied. He rose and turned to Miss Ashdown. Did anyone enter your room since this morning? No, she said firmly. I have not left it, save to go downstairs when they found him. Holmes's eyes moved to the window. It was latched, but a faint smear marked the sill. Wax again, he said. And outside? He opened the window a fraction. The fog pressed in like a living thing. A narrow ledge, accessible from the adjacent room. Collingwood's, I said. Holmes nodded. The letter brought him down. The cord bound him or threatened to. The dagger finished the illusion. He straightened, his expression intent. Someone is guiding the investigation, Watson, leaving breadcrumbs of silk and wax. To what end? I asked. Holmes's voice was very quiet. To force a reckoning that was delayed too long. From below came the sound of a door opening heavily, and then a voice raised in agitation. Lord Ashdown's. Holmes turned toward the stairs. It is time, he said, to hear what fear has been buying in this house. And as we descended once more into the shadowed heart of Ashdown House, I felt with growing certainty that the most dangerous thing within its walls was not the gilded dagger, but the truth it had been designed to conceal. We found Lord Ashdown in the morning room, pacing before the cold hearth with restless strides. The agitation in his manner was no longer restrained by dignity. His hands trembled, and the set of his jaw suggested a man driven into a corner by forces he neither understood nor controlled. At the sound of our approach, he wheeled about sharply. "What is this I hear?" he demanded. "Another disturbance upstairs? Another trick?" His eyes went to Holmes with something approaching hostility. I was assured matters were in hand. Holmes removed his hat and laid it carefully upon a side table. "My lord," he said evenly, "matters are very much in hand. They simply do not rest where you expected them to." Ashdown flushed. "I will not be spoken to in riddles in my own house." "Then let us speak plainly," Holmes returned. "Your secretary did not die where he was attacked. He was summoned by letter from his room. He came willingly. He believed himself compelled by something more powerful than fear." Ashdown's mouth tightened. "You accuse me—" "I accuse no one," Holmes said. "I observe. Mr. Collingwood wrote a letter sealed with green wax. He either wrote it under instruction or in expectation of a meeting which he could not refuse. That letter was read by Miss Ashdown. It was burned imperfectly in the library fireplace, and yet its seal was not destroyed with sufficient care. Miss Ashdown, who had entered quietly behind us, stiffened. "I did not burn it," she said. "No," Holmes agreed. "You did not." Ashdown turned upon her. "Imogen, what is this?" She raised her head, her face pale but resolved. "Uncle," she said, "I think it is time that the truth ceased to be rearranged." A silence fell, heavy, irrevocable. Holmes watched them both with keen interest but said nothing. "Collingwood," Miss Ashdown continued, "had discovered something about the estate, about the trusts you manage. He came to me because he believed I was ignorant of it, and because he believed I would not be complicit." Ashdown's voice shook. "You exaggerate. The man was an accountant, nothing more." "He was a conscientious one," said Holmes quietly, "and therefore dangerous." Ashdown's composure broke. "He threatened me," he burst out, "with exposure, with ruin. He said he would go to the courts, to the press. Do you know what that would mean? My name, my family, dragged through the gutter." "And so you killed him?" Lestrade demanded, stepping forward. Ashdown recoiled. "No, God help me, no, I would never—" He stopped, breathing hard. "I meant to frighten him, only that. I arranged a meeting. I took the dagger to make him listen. The cabinet, it has a false back. I did not think—" Holmes raised a hand. "The dagger was never meant to be used," he said, "which is why it was not wielded. It was placed. Someone else completed the act." Ashdown stared at him. "Someone else?" Holmes turned slowly. "Mr. Vane," he said. The name hung in the air like a struck bell. Lestrade spun toward the door. "Bring him here," he barked. Moments later, Vane stood before us, his smile gone at last, replaced by a sharp, calculating stillness. "So," he said lightly, "the game's up." Holmes regarded him. "You intercepted the letter," he said, "or persuaded Collingwood to write it. You used Miss Ashdown's fear as leverage. You bound him with silk, green chosen to echo the seal, and made him believe his disgrace imminent. Then you staged the murder to implicate Lord Ashdown beyond doubt." Vane shrugged. He deserved it. "You chose the dagger because it was unmistakable," Holmes went on. "You used gilt dust to mark the cabinet, wax to mark the trail. You wanted the crime to accuse itself." Lestrade stepped forward, handcuffs ready. "And the footman?" "A convenient shadow," Holmes replied. "As was the locked door. But you misjudged one thing, Mr. Vane." Vane raised an eyebrow. "And that was?" "Fear," said Holmes. "You assumed it would silence everyone else as thoroughly as it silenced Collingwood." Vane's gaze flicked to Miss Ashdown, and for the first time I saw unease. Lestrade seized his arm. "You're under arrest for murder." Vane did not resist. As he was led away, Holmes turned to Lord Ashdown. "The truth has a way of demanding payment," he said. "You delayed it. Mr. Vane accelerated it." Ashdown sank into a chair, suddenly an old man. Later, as we stepped out into the fog-bound street, I ventured a question. "The dagger," I said. "Why gilded?" Holmes gave a faint smile. "To distract," he said. "Murderers who ornament their crimes hope we will admire the surface and forget the substance." "And the substance is always human weakness," Holmes replied. He hailed a cab, already turning his thoughts elsewhere. "Come, Watson," he said. "There are simpler crimes waiting, and fewer daggers that shine in the dark." The fog had thickened by the time we left Ashdown House, wrapping the street in a grey pall that muffled sound and softened outlines, as though London itself wished to draw a veil over what had transpired within those walls. The cab rolled away, the great house receding into shapelessness, but the impressions of the morning clung to me with unwelcome persistence. Holmes sat opposite, silent, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes fixed upon nothing that I could see. I knew that look well. The case, though outwardly concluded, was still arranging itself in his mind, each motive weighed, each misstep examined with the same cool precision he applied to clues of wax and dust. "You do not appear satisfied," I ventured at last. Holmes glanced at me, one eyebrow lifting slightly. "Satisfied is a word I reserve for mathematics and tobacco," he said. "Human affairs rarely conclude so neatly." "But Vane confessed in all but words," I said. "And Lord Ashdown will answer for his own sins," Holmes interrupted quietly, "though not, I suspect, in the dock where Vane will stand." The cab jolted over a rut, and he shifted, drawing his coat closer. "Vane's crime," he went on, "was not born of sudden passion. It was the inevitable result of prolonged observation. He saw fear in Ashdown, silence in Collingwood, and hesitation in Miss Ashdown. He merely supplied the catalyst." "And the silk cord?" I asked. "The binding. A threat more than a restraint," Holmes replied. "A reminder of consequences. Collingwood was not overpowered. He was persuaded. The most efficient murders are committed with the victim's cooperation." I shuddered at the thought. When we reached Baker Street, the familiar rooms greeted us with their comfortable disorder. Mrs. Hudson had laid a fire, and the cheerful crackle of flames seemed almost indecent after the chill solemnity of the morning. Holmes removed his coat and went at once to his chemical bench, where he placed the fragment of green silk and the chip of sealing wax side by side. "Observe," he said, indicating them with his pipe. "Different origins. The wax is commercial, common. The silk is imported, expensive. Vane spared no cost when it suited him and economized when it did not. A revealing inconsistency." "You mean he did not anticipate your scrutiny?" I said. "No criminal ever does," Holmes replied. "They plan for concealment, not interpretation." There was a knock at the door. Lestrade entered, his expression unusually subdued. "Well," he said, "Vane's been charged. Tried to make a speech about injustice and society. The magistrate wasn't impressed." "And Lord Ashdown?" Holmes asked. Lestrade hesitated. "Resigned his trusteeships, lawyers already swarming. It'll be quiet, though. Very quiet." Holmes nodded once as though he had expected no other outcome. "And the footman?" "Released," Lestrade said. "Cook confirmed the cut. I owe you one." Holmes waved the remark aside. "You owe the boy his liberty," he said. "That is sufficient." Lestrade lingered a moment longer. "You know," he said gruffly, "I thought it was the dagger. All that guilt and show had me convinced it was about appearances." "It was," said Holmes. "Just not the ones you were watching." After Lestrade departed, Holmes sank into his chair, at last allowing himself the luxury of repose. The firelight picked out the sharp planes of his face, softening them just enough to remind me that even the keenest intellect is housed in mortal flesh. "What will become of Miss Ashdown?" I asked. "She will inherit less ignorance," Holmes replied, "which is often a burden heavier than gold." He fell silent again, then spoke, almost to himself. The dagger was never the heart of the matter. It was a symbol of authority, of threat, of ornamented power. Vane understood that men are more easily led by what glitters than by what cuts. "And Collingwood," I said quietly. Holmes's gaze flickered. "He believed integrity would protect him," he said. "It rarely does, Watson. But it must be believed in nonetheless, or we are left only with Vane's philosophy, and I find that intolerable." Night had fallen by the time I prepared to retire. As I extinguished the lamp, Holmes was already stretched upon the sofa, his pipe sending its familiar wreaths toward the ceiling. "Another case concluded," I remarked. "Another illusion dispelled," he corrected. "The world will produce more soon enough." And as I lay awake, listening to the distant rumble of the city, I could not rid myself of the image of that dagger, bright, deliberate, and terribly human, nor of the thought that, in some shadowed corner of London, another such ornament even now awaited the hand that would one day employ it. Sleep did not come readily to me that night. The quiet of Baker Street, ordinarily so comforting, seemed charged with thought, as though the case we had left behind refused to be entirely dismissed. Holmes, however, appeared to sink at once into that curious half-slumber which I had learned was often more productive for him than conscious reasoning. His pipe had gone out, yet his fingers still rested upon it, as if unwilling to relinquish even the symbol of occupation. It was some hours later, judging by the deep stillness and the distant striking of a church clock, that I became aware of movement. Holmes had risen and was standing by the window, peering through a narrow gap in the curtains at the street below. "Watson," he said softly, without turning, "do you ever consider how rarely crimes conclude when we believe they do?" I pushed myself upright, suddenly alert. "In what sense?" I asked. "In the sense," he replied, "that the law contents itself with responsibility, while the truth concerns itself with cause." He drew the curtain aside a fraction more. A lone figure passed beneath the lamp opposite, its footsteps echoing faintly on the stones. "Vane will hang," Holmes went on, "or be imprisoned for life, depending upon the temper of the court and the appetite of the press. Lord Ashdown will retreat into respectability, diminished but intact. Miss Ashdown will inherit a fortune cleansed by scandal. And yet the conditions that made the crime inevitable will persist." "You mean greed," I said. "Greed," Holmes agreed, "and fear. But above all, complacency. Men like Ashdown believe themselves insulated by position. Men like Vane learn to exploit that belief. Collingwood merely stood in the way." He turned from the window and began pacing the room. "You noticed," he continued, "that Vane never denied the intellectual pleasure of the act. He resented being caught, not the killing itself." "That struck me as monstrous," I said. "Monstrous," Holmes replied, "but logical. He regarded the murder as a proof of superiority, of control. The dagger was his signature, not his weapon." He stopped before the mantelpiece, his gaze fixed on the fire's dying embers. "And yet," he added, "he made mistakes." "The silk?" I suggested. "The silk, the wax, the timing." Holmes smiled faintly. "And above all, the assumption that others would remain as frightened as he intended them to be." "You mean Miss Ashdown?" "Yes. Fear can be cultivated," Holmes said, "but it cannot be relied upon indefinitely. It decays into resolve." I considered this in silence. The image of her pale, resolute face rose again before me. "There is something else," Holmes said abruptly. "Something I did not tell Lestrade." I looked up sharply. "The cabinet," he continued. "Its false back was old, installed decades ago. Ashdown had not conceived it. He inherited it. Then the deception was generational, Holmes finished, which makes it all the more difficult to eradicate. He resumed his seat at last, leaning back with a sigh that seemed to carry more weariness than I had ever heard from him. "Watson," he said, "do you know why I dislike cases of this kind?" "Because they are sordid," I ventured. "Because they are tidy," he corrected. "The solution presents itself, the culprit is named, and everyone congratulates themselves upon order restored. But order was the very thing that permitted the crime." The fire collapsed inward with a soft hiss. Holmes reached for the poker and stirred it absently. "You will write this one up," he said. "If you permit me," I replied. "I do," he said, "but do not gild it." I smiled faintly. "I shall do my best." "Remember," he added, "the dagger was never the mystery. It was merely the excuse." "For what?" I asked. "For examining the men who admired it," Holmes said. The first light of dawn was creeping into the room by the time he finally lay back upon the sofa once more. The city outside was stirring again, indifferent as ever to the dramas enacted within its walls. As I watched him at rest, I reflected, as I have done so often, that Holmes's genius lay not merely in his intellect, but in his refusal to be deceived by surfaces, however finely wrought. Where others saw ornament, he saw intention. Where others saw finality, he saw consequence. And it seemed to me then, as it has since, that the true danger of the Gilded Dagger was not that it could kill a man, but that it could persuade others to look no further than its shine. The following morning dawned clearer. The fog lifted as though London itself had drawn a long breath. I was at breakfast when Holmes emerged from his room, freshly shaven and already dressed for the day, his manner brisker than it had been since before the affair at Ashdown House. "You slept at last," I observed. "Intermittently," he replied, "but enough to confirm a suspicion." I laid down my cup. "A suspicion? I thought the matter concluded." Holmes gave me a sidelong glance. "Concluded for the courts, perhaps. Not entirely for us." He seated himself opposite me and reached for the Times, scanning it with rapid efficiency. His finger paused. "As I expected," he said. "What is it?" I asked. "Vane's solicitor has announced an intention to argue diminished responsibility. A man led astray by circumstances and provocation." I frowned. "But he planned everything." "Precisely," said Holmes, "which is why such an argument interests me." He folded the paper and leaned back. "There is a final thread, Watson, one that has not yet been properly tied." "You mean motive beyond greed?" "Beyond greed," Holmes agreed. "Greed alone does not demand ceremony. Vane staged a morality play. He wanted the dagger seen. He wanted Ashdown accused. He wanted Miss Ashdown to witness collapse." "To punish them?" I asked. "To educate them," Holmes replied. "A man like Vane does not merely remove obstacles. He instructs the world in his superiority." There came a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a young clerk bearing a note, which he handed to Holmes with some trepidation. "From Miss Ashdown, sir." Holmes opened it at once and read in silence. When he finished, his expression had softened. "She asks to see me," he said. "Privately. Will you go?" "I think I must." We walked together part of the way, Holmes unusually contemplative. At the door of a modest house in Kensington, he paused. "You need not accompany me further, Watson." "Do you expect trouble?" I asked. "No," he said. "Resolution." He returned an hour later, his face grave but composed. "She told you something new," I said at once. "Yes," he replied. "Something old, rather." He removed his gloves slowly. Vane had known Collingwood years before. They were students together. Vane was dismissed for dishonesty. Collingwood testified against him. I drew a sharp breath. Then this was revenge. "In part," Holmes said. but revenge refined by patience. Vane waited until the scales of fortune reversed, until Collingwood served a man who embodied the privilege Vane despised. Then he struck, not merely at Collingwood, but at the entire structure that had excluded him. "And the dagger?" "A symbol of inherited power," Holmes replied. "Gilded, ornamental, preserved behind glass. Vane wanted it to accuse its owner." I was silent, considering the depth of it. "Miss Ashdown," Holmes continued, "burned the letter not to protect her uncle, but to protect Collingwood's reputation. It contained his confession that he feared Vane's return more than exposure. And you let her believe she had deceived you." Holmes smiled faintly. "She needed to speak freely. Fear again, Watson. Fear unravels truth faster than interrogation." That evening, as the lamps were lit and the city settled once more into its endless rhythm, Holmes took up his violin. The music he drew from it was subdued, almost melancholic, wandering through themes unresolved. "The world will remember the dagger," he said suddenly, without pausing. "It always remembers the object, rarely the hand." "And you?" I asked. "I shall remember the letter," he said. "Unsent truths are the most dangerous weapons of all." As the final notes faded, I felt that peculiar mixture of admiration and unease which Holmes so often inspired. The case was closed, yet its implications lingered. About power, about silence, about the terrible efficiency of intellect divorced from conscience. And I knew that when I set these words to paper, I must be careful, as Holmes had warned, not to gild the tale, lest readers too be distracted by the shine and miss the cut beneath. The matter might well have ended there, dissolving into the quiet obscurity which so often follows even the most lurid of public scandals, had it not been for one final conversation which occurred some weeks later and which, in my judgment, places the entire affair of the Gilded Dagger in its proper light. Holmes and I were seated one evening before the fire, the city wrapped once more in winter mist, when he laid aside a thin sheaf of correspondence and regarded me with an expression of mild curiosity. "You will be interested to know, Watson," he said, "that Percival Vane has written to me." "To you?" I exclaimed. "From prison?" "Yes." With commendable neatness and no small amount of vanity. He wished, it seems, to know precisely at what moment I ceased to believe in his performance. "And what did you reply?" I asked. "That I never believed in it at all." Holmes leaned back, his fingers interlaced. "Vane misunderstood the nature of intelligence," he continued. "He believed it sufficient to be clever. He overlooked the necessity of restraint." "You mean the embellishments," I said. "The dagger, the silk." "Precisely. The locked room, the theatrical placement of the weapon, the repeated motifs of wax and cord, these were not necessities. They were indulgences. Each one was an invitation." "To you," I said. "To anyone who knew how to look," Holmes replied. "A crime constructed to be admired is already half confessed." He rose and crossed to the window, peering out at the indistinct glow of the street lamps. "Vane believed himself an author," he went on. "Ashdown, Collingwood, even Miss Ashdown were characters in his narrative. What he failed to consider was that characters, unlike abstractions, possess inconvenient depths. Miss Ashdown," I said thoughtfully. "She was meant to remain silent." "She was meant to remain afraid," Holmes corrected. "Instead, she chose clarity. That was the one variable he could not control." There was a pause, broken only by the crackle of the fire. "And Collingwood?" I asked. "Was there ever a moment he might have escaped?" Holmes did not answer at once. "He might have fled," he said finally. "He might have exposed Ashdown publicly or sought protection, but men of conscience are often slow to believe that others have none. That hesitation cost him his life." I reflected soberly upon this. "The law has done what it can," Holmes added. "Vane will be remembered as a murderer of unusual ingenuity. Ashdown will be remembered, if at all, as unfortunate. Collingwood will scarcely be remembered at all. And you," I asked. Holmes turned, a faint smile touching his lips. "I shall remember a letter," he said. "A seal broken too hastily, and a thread of green silk that did not belong where it was placed." He resumed his seat, reaching instinctively for his pipe. "There is a temptation," he went on, "to believe that justice resides in outcomes, arrests, sentences, restored order. But justice, Watson, lies equally in understanding. Without that, we merely exchange one illusion for another." I took up my pen then, knowing that the time had come to set the final words upon the page. As for the dagger itself, it was eventually returned to the Ashdown estate, stripped of its notoriety and locked away once more behind glass. It will doubtless resurface in some future catalogue, admired for its craftsmanship and its curious history, its darker associations softened by time and distance. Yet I cannot think of it now without recalling Holmes's quiet disdain for ornamentation where truth is concerned. The dagger did not kill Lionel Collingwood. It merely announced the intentions of a man who believed display to be a substitute for substance. When at last I retired that night, Holmes was already reclining upon the sofa, his eyes closed, the day's concerns dismissed with the ease of long practice. "Another case, Watson," he murmured, "in which the obvious was designed to conceal the essential." "And the essential?" I asked. "That men rarely forgive the mirror held up to them," he replied, "and that those who decorate their crimes are often trying to persuade themselves." The city outside moved on, indifferent and eternal, as it always has. Somewhere within it, new secrets were forming, new fears taking shape, and new ornaments awaiting their fatal purpose. But for that night at least, Baker Street was at peace, and the mystery of the Gilded Dagger, its shine, its deception, and its cost, had at last been rendered harmless by the one thing it could not withstand: the quiet, relentless clarity of reason.